Hello and welcome to another episode of the Everyday Joy podcast. I'm your host, Joy Ravella. Let's get into today's verse.
Do not hurry to speak, or be in a hurry as you think what to tell God. For God is in heaven, and you are on the earth, so let your words be few. Ecclesiastes chapter 5, verse 2, from the New Life Version.
So I have the lovely Sharon here with me in studio. So good to have you again here today.
It's good to be with you on this lovely Wednesday.
Now, your name is spelled like Sharon, but it's pronounced Sharon. I've never actually asked you why, because you just introduced yourself to me as Sharon. Why the difference in pronunciation?
It's an ethnic variation. Because I'm Jewish and was born in Israel, and in Israel people pronounce the last syllable with the accent, so it's Sharon.
Yeah. Right. So if someone calls you Sharon, do you tell people how to pronounce it correctly, or do you let it slide most of the time? What do you normally do?
Yeah, look, I let it slide. I don't mind. I know Sharon is kind of foreign sounding and a bit difficult for some people. It's absolutely fine.
Okay. Well done you. I think for me, I changed my name to Joy because it was just easier to pronounce, because my actual name, my legal name is Kavya, and that's spelt Kavya, which for someone looking at it, there's like 2,000 different ways of pronouncing it.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not sure how I'd pronounce it.
Exactly. So good to have you here in studio, Sharon. Today, we are looking at a verse found in Ecclesiastes 5:2 about not hurrying and not telling God what you think he needs to hear and giving him room to speak, I guess. I think that for me is my first impression of this verse. As someone who does a lot of talking, I often have to remind myself that you got to let God speak too, Joy. You've got to leave some room in there for that. What about you? What are your first impressions?
Yeah, wow, yes, I actually had a different first impression, but that's such a good one, to let God speak. Wow. My thinking was that because I often open my mouth and speak without thinking and put my foot in it, so for me that verse says, even a fool can look wise if he keeps his mouth shut. So, if I kept my mouth shut just a little bit more, I could look a whole lot wiser. Yeah, it's also risky when you think about it. I mean, the number of times I've regretted saying what I've said without thinking, and I've had to learn to think before you speak. So for me, that's what the verse means. Just think before you speak. Think a little, reflect a little. You can't unsay something.
Sharon, what do you think this verse tells you about who God is or what he values?
My grandmother used to say that God doesn't listen to the prayers of passers-by. It's an interesting saying of hers, and I've thought about it for years and years and years. What does that mean? Because we know God listens to prayers, don't we, right?
Yeah.
That's what it says. God listens to our prayers. But I think what she meant by it was the kinds of prayers that are just kind of flung up to God without thinking through, careless words, thoughtless words, including blaming God for things. She meant God doesn't listen to careless words, thoughtless words. And I think the other thing she meant was that prayers that are given to God by people who don't linger, they don't linger with God. They actually don't spend time to know God. They don't know who they're talking to. And God is in heaven, so we need to consider the majesty and the person that we are talking to, the creator of the universe. So when we think about God, it shapes what we're going to say to him, right? God doesn't listen to prayers of passers-by. Don't be a passerby with God.
Yeah, take that time. And I think, even just on a human level, right? If you have connection with someone who's only really contacting you to get stuff from you, or they're not really acknowledging who you are, it's so much easier to have that connection with someone who you know is investing into that relationship. Yeah, and we're invited to that, which is the most beautiful thing.
That's right. And we know that with God, we don't have to say much. We need to say what we mean, but we don't have to say much. And actually, Jesus kind of refers back to this verse a little when he gives his disciples the Lord's Prayer. He says, don't go on and on. God knows what you need before you ask him, before you open your mouth. And so this is an invitation. Spend time with God. Don't be in a hurry.
Yeah, that's something I think I need to write somewhere, because it's hard to do in a fast-forward world with 2,000 tabs open.
Right, especially these days. Our world just seems to spin faster and faster, and there's so much being thrown at us from all directions all at once. To linger with God is so crucial for our soul.
Yeah. Have you got a story of how this verse is applied in your life?
Yeah, I do. I actually have a lovely story about me and my husband. So when you spend time with a person who is that close to you and loves you so much and you love them so much, you learn to read them. You learn to read them better, and you learn to trust them more, and the love that you have for one another just gets stronger and stronger. So my husband is, without a doubt, my best friend on the face of this earth. He knows me, he cares for me the best, and I trust him. I trust him implicitly. I trust his judgment. I trust his love and his care for me, and I know he does the same for me. So we don't need to say much to one another because we read each other. We finish each other's sentences, as the song goes. So this is the kind of relationship that we can have with God when we linger with him, when we spend time with him.
And that's the invitation that we have. That's the opportunity we have to linger in God's presence. For someone who struggles to stay still, what would be your advice or your thoughts? Because, with another human being, you can spend time with them. You can do activities together. But it can be challenging to learn to spend time. And how does one even begin doing that with a God who they can't necessarily, in the human sense, hear or sit down and have a cup of coffee with or something like that?
For me, I found that, what works for me, and it might not work for everyone, but for me, reading the Bible. I started reading the Bible every day, probably a good 20 years ago, and for my benefit, not for God's benefit, for my benefit. And I've found that really grounds me in his presence. And sometimes I read the Bible through really fast because I just want to get an overview of God's character in my life, because the story's about God, not about me. And sometimes I linger over a verse or a chapter or a phrase, but it's just crucial for me to read the Bible every single day. And that's how I found that I can spend time with God.
Well, that wraps up today's episode of the Everyday Joy podcast. You can get in touch via the email. It's just in the description below. Back tomorrow. I'll catch you then.